Crosson.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you.
This chair out of the way.
Okay, so it's really great to be here. And so all of the Fishers Carmel people go this week. All the Atlanta people will be going next week. Julie and I love the first week in April now that we don't have to join that sojourn of everybody heading down to the Panhandle. So you have a handout in front of you. And so what we're going to do is spend like 20, 30 minutes kind of looking at this whole issue of estate planning, and businesses are uniquely positioned to create some challenges in the estate planning thing. But when you hear the word estate planning, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Wills, trust. I mean, here's what I know you all have. You all have a stack of documents about this thick. And on top of it's a little, quote, executive summary, right? That's supposed to make it simple. And you still don't understand that. But I'm not going to talk about techniques today. If you look at the diagram in front of you, what happens to most people is they start their estate planning with techniques. You sit down with your attorney and he's like, okay, we got to do a discount family partnership, or we have to do some discount valuation with your business. We have to set up an ILIT, an irrevocable life insurance trust. So most people start their estate planning process with the techniques, and I'm going to propose to you that that's not where you start. So the title of this little talk is Beyond Estate Planning. I'm going to take you back to how do you leave assets, how much do you leave, and when do you leave them? There's some things you need to answer. I'm going to give you 6 questions that you have to answer or think through, and then the techniques get easier. I've been doing this for almost 4 decades now. And so the things I'm going to share with you have come not only from experience with clients, but just from the Bible. You may not know this. You see there, Ecclesiastes 7, 11, and 12. Did you all know that there's a verse about estate planning? Did you know that verse was in there? It says, wisdom along with an inheritance is good, and an advantage to those who see the sun. For wisdom is protection just as money is protection. But the advantage of knowledge or wisdom is that it preserves the lives of its possessors. So see, we all have a choice. We can leave our children wisdom or wealth. They'll both provide, but only one preserves, and that's wisdom. So if you're going to err, you're on the side of leaving your children wisdom versus wealth. I wrote a book, Your Life Well Spent, and the diagram on the back of your handout there, you look at you turn it over, there's a diagram. It's called Life Overview. This whole book, Your Life Well Spent, talks about that we spend our lives building capital. Most of us have thought about just building financial capital, but this book talks about we need to build spiritual and social capital into our children. Here's the thing, men and women, if we don't do that, we may amass a lot of financial capital, but we'll have a lousy foundation upon which to leave it. I've sat with too many men worth millions and millions of dollars and watched tears streaming down their face. They told me the stories that they didn't know their kids. They couldn't leave their assets to their kids, so they didn't spend time. So the life overview, I don't have time to go into it. There's a whole talk on this, but Your Life Well Spent would be a good resource to help you get perspective that as you build financial capital, as you build your business, as you build your career, you also build spiritual and social capital, and take time to pour in to your children. And by the way, these decisions on estate planning, future marriages of your children hang in the balance, okay? How you leave assets and how much and when to your daughters and sons, the marriages hang in the balance. I remember sitting with a young gal, she was 20 and a half years old, she was turning 21 and was recipient of a bunch of trusts. And he said, Russ, I'm getting married in a year. And I don't want to have happen to me what I saw happen to my mother and grandmother, who really didn't need a husband. So we designed a plan where they would live off the husband's income so he could feel good about himself, and we were very generous out of the trust. So don't stop to think, what about your sons? If you leave your sons too much money, or if you don't leave them, if you give them too much, then people say, well, they should have made it. Their dad gave them the money. If they don't make it, what will they tell them? They should have made it. Their dad gave them the money. So it's real interesting as we think about this, how much and when and all that, the most important thing is building spiritual and social capital into our children, so we at least have the option and to leave them financial capital. So what's the first question? The first question is, how much to your children and how much to charity? When I ask people that, they say, well, I don't know how to answer that. If you have a will, you've already got an answer. What I've learned with most businessmen is they have an answer, they just don't know what the answer is. Because they started the business and now it's grown, but they probably still carry it at book value. They don't really, I was with a guy the other day, and when we started doing planning for him, he supposedly had a $4 million business. He came up to me at Sunday school and said, hey, I just got an offer for $100 million for my business. He's a 40% owner. Guess what? What he needs to be thinking about is now he has a $40 million estate, not $4 million. I was just on the phone with him the other day and said, you've got to get your will changed. Because if something were to happen to you right now, each of your daughters would get $20 million. I don't think that's what you want. Okay? So I would say to you as business folks, make sure that you know what your current estate looks like. Factoring in insurance, factoring in the real value of your business and real estate and all that. Because usually what I see is when we graph this out for people, what we do in our company is we take that stack of documents and then we put it in a picture so you can see it. And when we show the business owner, oh, here's what it looks like, your kids are going to get X amount, they go, I didn't know that. So my point is, everybody has an answer. It's just, do you like the answer? Let me give you a principle. When your kids are young, 0 to 20, you usually err on the side of less rather than more to your kids. From 20 to 40, you kind of watch your kids, and as they start getting in their own careers and making it, you can begin to leave them more. And after they're over 40, I have found that it really doesn't matter how much you leave them. They've already made it. They doesn't matter. You can give them a lot or a little, it doesn't really matter. And so that's an important principle, this issue of how much to kids, less rather than more. I mean, give them enough to start a career and get a house or whatever, but don't take away their work ethic and things like this, okay? What's the worst thing that happens to your kids if you don't give them too much? They have to work like you did. I mean, you all worked hard and built a business, and so we don't want to take that away from our kids. So the answer to the how much question is less rather than more. Observe your kids, train them, spend time with them, invest in them, and you have the option then to potentially leave them more later. But make sure you know what the answer is. Right now, if I were to ask you, do you know the answer? If you have a will, you have an answer, but you just need to know what the number is and see if you're happy with it, okay? Now, how much to charity? The default is usually nothing. I've been doing this for 40 years and very seldom do I ever get a will where charity is already in there. But I would say to you, if you're not going to go to your kids, where should it go? It should go to God's work, all right? And so that's how those two play together. And if you look down at the techniques, question 5, most attorneys, I've never had an attorney really recommend estate planning and wills and putting charity into their will. The fact is, I was just with a guy in Naples, Florida, and he said, yeah, my investment people told me not to give it away. And I go, your kids already have enough, so why would they tell you that? Well, you know why they would tell them that, right? They get paid off the money, so it's like, why give it away? So I would just say to you, this is the first question. And guess what? When you answer that question, your estate planning gets a lot simpler. I mean, think how simple Warren Buffett's estate plan is, right? It's not real complicated because he's basically giving it to charity. That makes it simple. So when you answer that question, then the techniques get simpler. That's a principle I would share with you. Many times you have all this complicated stuff going on, it doesn't need to be that complicated once you answer this question. Second question, should you leave it equal or not? Let me just give you an answer to that. If you're not going to leave it equal, for whatever reason, there may be a reason, you got a handicapped child, any number of things, you just better explain it to your kids while you're alive. Don't let them find that out when you're gone. Because there's this interesting thing that kids expect it to be equal. And I hear people say, well, Russ, this one child's kind of wayward. I'm a bad steward if I give it to him. And I say, yeah, do you really want your last statement to be that you cut them out of your will? Is that what you want them to see about the love of Christ? So I would say that it'd be a worse steward. I'd rather invest, let's say I have 4 children, I'm giving them all $1 million, and one's wayward. I'd rather invest the $1 million in my will, hopefully be a testimony of love and acceptance, than say, oh, I got to be a good steward, and he might squander it. So in my experience, very rarely is it not equal. I've seen parents try to control their kids from the grave with things like beach bum language. Well, you'll get so much if you attend Bible study and all this. That's why you got to go back and do this side. You got to spend time with your kids now. You don't try to control them. I told the guy when I read his will and he had that beach bum language in there, I said, I would never be your trustee. Because now you got to judge. Are they going to enough Bible study? Are they doing enough of this? This is why it all ties together. Do you see that? So typically, the answer to that question is you leave it equal. If you don't leave it equal, it can create sibling conflict. I remember I had a client, had three daughters, and they left one daughter's stuff in trust because they didn't really trust her, and the other 2, and that even caused friction because it wasn't equal. It caused friction amongst the daughters. You can have the children fake spirituality. Hey, they know if they have to act a certain way to get something, they might fake it. And like I said, you have to judge. And if you leave it unequal and don't explain it, you may drive them from God. So typically it's going to be equal. And the idea of talking about it, we'll get to that in a minute, is absolutely critical. So that's the second question. All right, when and how do you leave it, okay? Well, usually you start leaving it when the kids have the skills and abilities to handle it, when they have the spiritual maturity to handle it, and when it's not going to undermine them learning the things they need to learn and to be productive citizens in society, okay? And you can leave it, the reason we have current and deferred, you can make annual gifts currently, or you can leave it in a deferred capacity through your estate. And I think what happens is, when do your kids need the money? It's interesting, right? If so, usually what we see is that it's better off to, if you're going to give it to them when you die, then sometimes you can help them when they're in their 20s and so forth, give it to them now. That's why you have this contrast here of current versus deferred. All right, and you kind of got to blend it together. I'd say the same thing about your charitable giving. If you're going to leave it to charity when you die, why don't you consider being more generous to the things you're supporting now while you're alive in a current capacity? But they kind of got to blend together. You know, you can do some current gifts to your kids. You can do deferred giving, but you kind of got to think about that as, and when is, like I said, once they get above 18, into 20, starting their careers, that's a time you may want to consider, if you're really going to pass your estate to them, you know, how can I do some stuff currently in a way that's helpful and not hurtful? But now let's get to the big one for business owners. This is where we really need to camp. The form of the asset. I'll spend a little time on this one. So here's the principle. The form of the asset should fit the skills of the recipient. What do I mean by that? You have 4 children. You have a business. The business makes up the majority of your estate. But one of your children is following you in the business, and they're good in the business. One wants to be a teacher, one wants to be a doctor, and one wants to be a missionary. They have no interest in the business. What most people do is they force the asset to their kids in the form that it's currently in. There's a reason only 35% of businesses make it to the second generation, and only 13% to the third, is because you, the patriarch, don't have the courage early on to do what it says here and begin to do capital conversion and diversification to get the assets in a form that fits the next generation. I have 3 boys. One's in our business, one builds houses in Huntsville, Alabama, and one sells coffee. Now, if I try to say to the boys, you're all going to have to get along owning a piece of a financial services company, that's not going to help the guy building houses. I mean, he could use some money to build houses. The one selling coffee, he's got other interests. You follow me here? Men and women, this is the most critical thing for a business owner. Because typically what the business owner does is he builds his net worth, and it's disproportionate amount of his net worth, 85, 90% of his net worth. And he's never forced himself to think, well, how's this look as it goes down through the estate? Okay? I have a client I've worked with, had a lumber company, and we started 25 years ago. Write the word process down. This is a process because your business is growing. This gentleman over here said his business was growing. So things change. So you start your estate planning, it's a process. That's why it says at the top of the page, estate decision-making process. You start the process. So you start off with where you are and you do your documents, but then you have to keep like revising them. So I told my friend 30 years ago, I said, you're in a family business and you don't know this yet, but you got 4 children and it doesn't look like they're all gonna come into the business. So we need to start diversifying. We need to probably buy some insurance to have, to have liquidity in the system so we can equalize, back to the number question 2. Now you fast forward 25 years, and it was a beautiful thing. I love it when a plan comes together, because we were able to equalize the estate with the 4 children, get the business to the son that's now running the business, and get an equal amount of estate assets to the other 3 children, but that would not have happened had we not done what is called here capital conversion or diversification or putting some other assets to the side. Business owners are notorious for never taking anything out of the business and just building the business. But I would say to you, you need some liquidity and grease in the system, or else it's going to kind of plug up the system. See, those documents you have, here's the thing that attorneys never do. So let's say you're Gen 1, and you have all these assets. They never take them and work them through to see if they really work. You know, it's one thing to have a $5 million estate or a $10 million estate or whatever the size of your estate is, but if 18 or 80% of it is your business, then all of a sudden, as it gets down to Gen 2, and even worse as it gets to Gen 3, things start not working. I work with a client now where we talk to the patriarch. They have a $20 million business. One son runs the business. So they have a son here who's running the business. This son is a little wayward, okay, not running the business. but they're leaving it equal. That's going to blow up because this guy wants to go fish in Florida, okay? This guy's running the business. And it even gets worse when you get down to their kids, okay? So here's what I want to say to you if you own a business as you're working through this. You've got to force yourself to flow it out and say, what's it look like? Because you may have children that can have ownership in it, but are they going to pay dividends? That's the problem that happens is the kids that aren't in the business want income. They look at their net worth and say, I'm worth all this money. I have 25% of the business. But I have no money. And the son running the business wants to put capital in the business to keep growing it, and you have all this conflict. And that's not what you want. And this is a unique challenge. Business owners have a more unique challenge than other people. Everybody needs to go through this process, whether you have a business or not. But the form of the asset is more problematic because the business owner, that's usually the biggest part of their net worth. And then it just kind of gums up the system. It looks good on paper, but then when you ask, what ends up happening here? All right, the guy running the business, the other three have 25% ownership. Are they even getting distribution for tax? I met with a young couple, and he says, yeah, I get this K-1, but I have to call the father-in-law just to get him to send me money to pay the taxes. Because, they've passed on assets to the daughter, but, there's no, so that's pretty kind of a bad situation to be in, right? When you got this asset, it's on your net worth, you're getting a K-1 for your taxable portion, but you get no cash. So now the poor son-in-law is having to do it out of his other cash flow. But let me tell you why this is hard for business. I'm going to give you 4 reasons why it's hard for business owners to do this. The first one is that you have to recognize your kids are different. You have to allow them to do what God's called them to do. And just because they didn't become like you and want to be in your business, it's okay. But you don't want to force them into your business. You want them to do what God's called and equipped them to do. That's what you want. They're going to be fulfilled. God's kingdom is going to be promoted, and you're not going to frustrate them. So as a business owner, it's okay if they're different. My 3 boys are all different. Secondly, the reason business owners don't like to deal with this is forces you to focus on your mortality. And so it's like you kind of ignore this. It's like, well, I'll deal with it later. I would encourage you to deal with it. You do your family a great favor when you get your estate plan in order, you get it graphed out, and as we'll talk about it here in a minute when you talk about it. Thirdly, our pride. Did you know that Psalm 49 talks about you business owners and you all that start businesses and put your name on it? Psalm 49 says that even wise men die, the stupid and the senseless alike perish, they leave their wealth to others. Their inner thought, so here's what we think, that our houses are forever and our dwelling places to all generations. They've called their lands after their own names. So we name businesses, we think our egos are tied to our business because they have our name on it. Men and women, it's still just financial capital. It's just like Coke stock or a money market fund or whatever, but for some reason the business, since we build it, well, we didn't really build it. What do you have that God didn't already give you? You think it's your ability to make wealth, but I, the Lord, have given you the ability to make wealth. But we think we did it. We put our name on it. And so by gosh, my legacy is going to be passing this business to my kids. That's a pride thing. You have to say, wait a minute, God has given me this capital in the form of stocks and bonds and business. It's up to me to get it in the right form to not frustrate my kids. And I think I've seen it as a pride issue that we don't do this. And I would say to you, you need to do it. And sometimes I think the 4th reason we tend to struggle with this form issue and won't convert it and won't diversify at all is because we feel like a failure. Did I fail because I didn't get my business onto my kids? I would say you fail if you don't help your children do what God's called them to do. And don't force them into your mold. All right, so now once you've answered those questions, how much to kids in charity and equal and all this, and when you're going to do it, now you're ready to go to your attorney and do the documents. And I would say they're a lot simpler probably than they were going to be because most attorneys assume you want to get it all to your kids. And so they will do all this elaborate stuff to get it to your kids. When in reality, if you've answered some of these questions, it may be pretty simple. All right? And I would just say, force yourself to flow the assets through and see what happens. Here's another principle. As assets flow through, you don't want to continue to have all this joint ownership. You want to get like for example, my dad passed away a couple years ago, and so I grew up on a farm in Kansas, and I have 4 siblings. So I could either have 20% of a whole bunch of pieces of property, or I could figure out how to do some trading and have 100% of a piece of property. The principle is when it moves down through here, that beach house, you want the cousins to be like 1/15 owners of a beach house? I mean, that's what happens if you don't work this out right. You with me? So the principles are form fits skills, and then you want to try to have you don't want to have a whole lot of joint ownership. Because that's just going to frustrate things. And I see it. You guys know what I'm talking about. Just talking about going to Florida. I mean, hey, we passed this down through I was with a couple the other day, and I asked him, her and her brother were going to keep the Florida house in their names 50-50. I go, do you even go there? No. Do your kids go there? No. Why do you want half of it? You need to trade around with your brother, and he wants to add $500,000 to it and do something else. I said, do you want to do that? No, I don't want to do that. She was totally freed up, and I said, guess what? You just take the assets that work for your family and let him have the assets that work for his family and get rid of this 50-50 deal. And guess what? It even gets worse when it goes down to their kids, because now they're, 4th of 50, so that's what, 12%? I mean, it's just crazy. So force yourself to walk the assets through your estate and make sure you don't have, write down the word, unintended consequences. If you don't do this, you will have unintended consequences, and it's better to do this ahead of time and go to the hard work of working through your estate, floating the assets through, and making sure you don't have any unintended consequences. And finally, you see the last box, which may be the most important. You need to talk about it. Let me give you a phrase. To the degree there's wealth, if there's not intentional communication about the wealth, it's tantamount to withholding affection. To the degree there is wealth, if there's not intentional communication about the wealth, it's tantamount to withholding affection. None of you would withhold affection from your kids and grandkids, would you? But if you don't talk about your estate and explain to your kids and grandkids why you've done what you've done and what you hope for them, then you've done them a tremendous disservice. And guess what? Having a family conference is not an option. Everybody has one. It's just whether or not you're going to still be there. Most of them have them after the funeral. And that's not when you want to have it. You want to gather your family, and you want to gather your kids and grandkids, and you want to have an intentional communication plan. You see those things there? Why? Let me real quickly tell you. Why do you have it? To pass on values and to be intentional about your communication. When do you have it? Whenever you have changes in the tax law, whenever your business changes, whenever maybe your situation changes, any number of things can precipitate a family meeting. And the more wealth you have, the more often you should have these family meetings. With the Cathy family, we have a calendar of meetings every year. Gen 2 meetings, Gen 3 meetings, Gen 2 and Gen 3 meetings, because they have a lot of wealth. Chick-fil-A. So the less wealth, maybe you only have a family meeting every 3 or 4 years or every 7 or 8 years, but you need to have them. Who comes to them? When your kids are 18 and older, they should start coming, and when they get married, the in-laws come too. I get asked that question all the time. So your kids and their spouses, what are you going to do at the meeting? You're going to educate them, you're going to explain your estate plan, you're going to pass on biblical values. I mean, you as a patriarch figure out ahead of time what you want to communicate. That can change. Where do you have it? You don't have it after the Christmas lunch. These are intentional meetings where you go to a hotel. Where do you go? You go to a hotel, you invite the kids. It's a special time or a retreat center, because this is a business meeting. It's just like this. You may have a third party help you facilitate it. But you need to have this family meeting. Because like I said, to the degree there's wealth, there's not intentional communication about the wealth. It's tantamount to withholding affection. I had a melanoma scare 2 years ago, and so I had all my boys and their spouses, and we had a family meeting. And what I did was I got a flip chart out, and this is a flip chart, so stay with me on that. And I basically we're in the dining room, and I explained to the boys our spiritual journey for 40 years and our financial journey for 40 years. Because I wanted them to know how we got where we got. Guess what? Your kids need to know how you got where you got. You didn't just all of a sudden live in the house you live in, or have your business. You took risks. You did all these things, right? You didn't just get there. They need to hear that. My boys and their spouses told me how much they appreciated hearing. They didn't know some of that stuff, some of the risks we'd taken, some of the ups and downs, and it was just helpful. I remember we facilitated a family meeting in Florida for this 3-generation family, very wealthy, and one of the grandkids went up to their granddad and said, "Thanks for sharing this. I didn't know you even worked." Because they don't know. They think you just had this stuff. It just happened. It didn't just happen. And the reason you have the family meeting is I told the boys, I wanted them to see what God had done, not what Julie and I had done. So I took them back to 1979 when we got married and just went, the 40 years and what we'd done spiritually and what God had done and what had happened financially. Explained to them the business, explained to them compounding and how we got the house we got and all that stuff. So my encouragement to you is have a family meeting. And so here's the thing. It's one thing to get your documents done, and you probably all have them, those techniques. You've got great attorneys, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about go beyond the estate plan pile of documents and say, all right, is my estate flowing in the way it should? Are there any unintended landmines out there that I don't see? Is my business clogging things up? Am I going to end up with my kids at odds with each other because of the way I've left the business? That's the kind of things you're trying to do. And then once you get it figured out, sit your family down and say, hey, we just want you to know. Your mom and I just want you to know. Your dad and I just want you to know. Here's what we've done and why we're doing it. I told my boys, I said, I'll finish with this. My punchline was, okay, boys, here's where we are. You just need to know something. Your mom and I are going to be generous as we can when we're alive, both to you and to God's work. And so if you see us don't think we're giving away your inheritance. Because we kind of are. But, the point is, we just explained to them. And we explained to them what we meant by equality. We're going to try to get everybody together for family vacations. And if somebody has to fly and I spend $1,000 and somebody drives and I spend $50, that's equal. Because it's still equal to you. It didn't cost you anything. So don't be counting up, hey, they spent money here and spent money there. So we explained to them what we expected and what we were going to do and what we were trying to do. We said we're going to try to be as equal as we can. We're going to try to meet your needs in different ways. My boys are in their late 20s, early 30s. They all have great jobs. It's just neat because God showed me this diagram years ago and we were able to invest in the kids. We have the privilege now of being generous with our kids because they're making it. And that's only by God's goodness to us. So hope what you've heard is, I'll just summarize with this. Leave your kids less versus more early on. Form that fits the skills, and you want to promote harmony in your estate planning. So go beyond estate planning, go beyond the documents, and do this soft side stuff because it's worth it. You don't want to be, so my dad passed away. I was in an attorney's office about like this in central Kansas, and his approach was, you'll just figure it out when I die. And it just could have been so much better had there been a meeting before that. So I'll leave it at that. It's hard work to do this process, I'll just say. And it's not urgent, but it's important. And as a business owner, I would just say to you, you got more complications because it's going to be a disproportionate amount of your estate. So equalization, not setting up your kids to potentially be at odds with each other is more problematic and just needs more work. So I'll end at that. Is that long? Is that too long or long enough? Or I usually like interaction, so forgive me for just getting into teacher modes.